Jesus said that the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around, and he asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. When I was 16 years old, I had a part-time job working at a petrol station. The petrol station had a supermarket attached to it. It was like a Foodery or a Coles or a 7-Eleven. I loved that job. It was easy work, standing behind a till, brushing and mopping floors, stacking shelves. It was a really interesting job. And if you like people watching, working in a petrol station is perfect because everyone needs petrol. A variety of customers was staggering. Police cars to motorbike gangs, even ride-on lawnmowers, we had it all. The store was also in a community, so you got to work with a bunch of regulars. You know, the guy who came in 2 minutes before closing to get a week's worth of groceries, or the granddad waiting outside for the doors to open on a Sunday morning at 7 a.m. so that he can get his newspapers, and then strangely at that time of the morning, his favorite crisps. They were like prawn flavored. The very best part of my job was that my auntie was the manager, and so I got lots of shifts. I was raking in the cash. I couldn't believe how well I was getting paid. It was well above the minimum wage, and it was cash in hand, so it was just a great season. I was living like a teenage monarch. Everything was perfect until an administrative error was discovered, and it turned out I was getting overpaid. The store's owner had thought that I was 18, not 16. Now, admittedly, I had an abundance of facial hair, but he really should have done a better job processing the paperwork. It turned out that I'd been being overpaid for about 6 months, getting the same as the 18-year-old staff members. Somehow, a group of these older staff got wind of this, possibly because I opened my big mouth. I can't remember, but the news of my inflated salary caused such a ruckus. They were calling it favoritism because I was related to one of the managers, but that wasn't it at all. The owner had genuinely thought that I was older. While it was all being figured out, workers were giving me the treatment. My name was Mud. I couldn't get people to cover my shifts or even talk to me while I worked. It was as if I'd stolen their money. I wasn't sure how we were going to move forward. I was told how much I'd been overpaid, and I looked at that amount of money and thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble, because it's not like I had a plan to pay it back. Obviously, I'd spent it. One option was that I took a massive pay cut and then worked for very little, a chance to refill the bucket. But I didn't really fancy doing that at all. So what was I going to do? Then something happened that no one expected. In a moment of immense generosity, the business owner decided to come up with his own plan. And he decided that his best plan of action was actually to give a pay rise to all the other staff. And well, after that, all was forgiven, and I was everybody's best friend. I wonder why. In Matthew chapter 20, Jesus is teaching his followers an incredibly important lesson, one that if they understood would transform everything. transform the 12, transform their lives. Jesus was using a parable to teach these disciples one of the great biblical truths. What was the lesson? What's the theological truth that's so important that it could radically reframe your whole life? Well, the lesson Jesus was teaching through this story of the workers in the vineyard is this: the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. That's Psalm 24, verse 1. There's something so human about this parable. I think any of us who have had a job, we kind of get it, whether we worked at a petrol station or Bunnings or Macca's or in a school or a church. When you work somewhere and somebody new joins the team, the first thing they want to know is this: what's the pay? And the second question is, what's the boss like? This is a what's the boss like story. Jesus is connecting contemporary ears to ancient truth. The promised land belonged to God. His people were tenants, not owners. In fact, in their very own law book, in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23, we read that the land must not be permanently sold because the land is mine. In the kingdom of God, the family of God sees stuff differently. Why? Because God invites us to see things, people, property, possessions, power and position from an upside down perspective. This is only possible when we realize who God is and what God is like. And that's what this story is about, to give us a glimpse into his generosity. Jesus is the ultimate demonstration of God's generosity. He's the one who, though he was rich, for our sakes became poor. He's the king who would generously pay the ransom for our sin on a Roman cross. Our debt is paid in full. Now in his story in Matthew 20, Jesus wants us to learn about how this radical generosity is not just a nice idea, but it's the very heart of God. At Riverview Church, we talk about generosity a lot. We talk about it being the heart of the Father. This kingdom parable teaches us how that heart is and can be expressed in our world. The generosity of God seeks the welfare of the less fortunate. In a world of day laborers, the worst thing that can happen is that you don't get any work at all. In a world where people live from day to day without credit cards on tap, without savings to fall back on, or Facebook Marketplace, or government support like Centrelink, there's no plan B. There is either money for food or there's no food. For years, I read this story all wrong. I missed the point completely. I thought this parable was about payment for work. Now, that's a small part of it. But the glaringly obvious but completely missed part of this Jesus story is that the owner goes out all through the day to find workers. He wants to give people the opportunity in a dignified way to be able to put food on the table. You can almost hear the owner say out loud, there must be more workers out there, men and women who need work. I'm going back to town. I'm taking another look. Nobody needs to go hungry tonight, not while I have the ability to do something about it. This is so incredibly radical. The generosity of God is not just found in the part of the story where the workers get overpaid, but in the part of the story where he keeps going back to town to invite more and more people to come and join his community of care and sovereign grace. Jesus also teaches us that the generosity of God is a generosity that is not determined by financial ethics of an empire. In this story, we witness Jesus in an absolutely epic moment of comedy and communication excellence, deconstructing cultural obedience to an empire mindset. Jesus actually uses empire mindset to construct kingdom obedience. Let me explain. Empire mindset says that you have the right to do whatever you want with your money. In the parable of the workers, the owner of the field argues with a grumpy employee, don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? He absolutely does. And he is choosing to use his wealth to make sure that everyone is blessed. He has been blessed to be a blessing. See, empire says you are blessed to impress, but the kingdom of Jesus says you are blessed to be a blessing. Finally, Jesus teaches us that the generosity of God is a generosity that builds a community of care. The parable of the workers is not a lesson in running a profitable business in the modern Western world. It's a lesson in how to build a community where everyone who contributed is able to feed their family and have dignity and the image of God expressed in and through their lives. As Alan Brown reminds us in his work on the parables of Jesus, God's values are offensive to our individualism. Actually, this story doesn't just challenge our cultural addiction to the sovereign self. It offends our sense of justice and fairness and ethics. We think each person should be paid for the contribution they made. God turns the justice system the right way up. The person with the greatest need, the one that's missed out on the most of the day, gets everything they need, like the one who worked hard all day. Kingdom generosity begins when we realize that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. We are just tenants in the vineyard. Kingdom generosity reaches to the least, an offense to the prosperity gospel, but a reflection on the true gospel when Jesus comes to bind up the brokenhearted and heal the sick and set the captives free. Kingdom generosity seems scandalous, dangerous, and even irresponsible. It is a picture of grace. None of us get what we deserve. For it is by grace we are saved through faith, and this is not of ourselves. It is the gift of God. Kingdom generosity is something we can all join with Christ in bringing to the world. One of my adventure heroes is Alex Honnold. He's probably the greatest climber on the planet right now. He's famous for his free solo of El Capitan in Yosemite. But Alex was a legend long before he crushed that climb. Recently, I was watching Alex's most recent climbing challenge. He was climbing one of the most remote big walls in the world in Greenland. It was a first ascent, meaning no person had ever made it to the top of this wall. The video crew tried to make it look hard for Alex with lots of dramatic music, but in reality, he just crushed it. He's such an amazing climber. Being interviewed after the fact, they were talking about the things that he was passionate about, and he was talking about his passion for the environment, and he talked about his love of the planet and how he wants to be part of the solution to the environmental challenges that we face, and so on and so forth. Whenever he was being interviewed, it was actually being shot in his home, and I was touched by what a very simple and normal little bungalow this man lives in. And then when being asked about how he's doing and how he's contributing, he actually divulged some private information that maybe he shouldn't have, because I'm not sure if he asked his wife for permission. But he told that he gives away 30% of his income. I almost fell off my chair. He figured out what he needed to live on, and then he made sure that he was able to give away what he didn't need and contribute that to others. What an amazing challenge. Most of us would be saying, no. You need to invest. You need to diversify your assets, buy low, sell high. But it turns out that Alex is actually closer to the kingdom than he maybe even realizes, because this is the heart of the king, the generosity of God. As Jesus said in the parable of the workers in the vineyard, are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. May God help us to be generous people. May God give us generous hearts. May God help us find our true riches in Christ Jesus. May God help us to have the heart of the Father.